We are building this mobile-first portfolio intended for complete beginners to HTML and CSS. You do not need to have coded anything in the past to start this video, as I will be walking you through all the code every step of the way. Up top we have our picture, name, title. Here we have two buttons with hover effects. We can download our CV as a PDF, or we can click the contact info that scrolls down to the contact section, where we can click the email icon to open and send an email to our email address, or to forward visitors to our GitHub or LinkedIn account. Further, we have an About section that has a bit of info about our career and education, as well as some introductory text, an experience section that showcases the skills we know in front-end and back-end, and you can add more skills here as you want. Next, we are showcasing projects that we are proud of with our title, picture, and also links to the GitHub repo and a live demo of each project. And should you want to create these projects after this tutorial, you can find them on this channel. And at the bottom, we have a nice footer segment. If you're ready to learn HTML and CSS from scratch in a fun and interactive project, then you've come to the right place. At the end of the video, we will host and deploy our website for free online so we can share our portfolio with anybody we want. We will also learn how to create a custom font for our website using Google Fonts. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do, if you don't already have it installed, is go to code.visualstudio.com and download Visual Studio Code. That is going to be where we write our code and where all the website is going to take form. So you're going to download that for either Mac or Windows and just download the stable build as you can see here. Once you've downloaded and installed it, you're going to run it and it's going to look a bit like this. Next, we are just going to create a folder on our desktop. We're going to call it HTML and CSS portfolio, and then we're going to drag that folder into our VS Code. And as we can see, if I open this a bit further, this is our Explorer that we have here. We have Search, Explorer, Source Control, and other stuff, but we can go to the Explorer for now. We see that we are working inside of this portfolio. So anything we create here, like a new file, let's create our first file and call it index.html and hit enter. And now we have created an HTML file. Index is a standard name for the main file we have in our portfolio, the main HTML file. So you'll see index.html in most projects. Then I'm going to full screen VS Code by double clicking here. And if we see here on the left menu, we see a tab called extensions. We're going to click that and we are going to install something called a live server. If we don't already have that installed, by Ritwik Day, you're going to hit install here, and that's just going to enable within VS Code. And then you're going to have this option down in the right corner where that says go live. And then we are going to install another extension called Prettier Code Formatter. We're going to install that, and that is going to help format our code in a correct and easily read way. This is optional, but I highly suggest it because then your code is going to be similar to mine and it's going to be easier to follow this video. With those two extensions enabled, let's start typing in our HTML file. I'm going to type exclamation mark, and then we are given some options that VS Code is very good at suggesting. We are going to use this a lot in our code to save us time typing. If we click exclamation mark, we get some boilerplate HTML template. In essence, this is the bare minimum you need for an HTML file. If we now hit save, we see that my code was formatted because of Prettier. And now, if I right-click on this file and I hit open with live server, we see that my browser has opened with my index.html file opened as well. So now if I hit save here, we see that the little refresh icon is refreshing because on every save, a live server is basically updating this website. So now if I change, you see the document here, that's the title of our website. Let's update that to our name. So Jonathan Doe, obviously write your own name here. and front-end developer and hit save. Misspelled that, Jonathan. So we see that that is updated up here. As well, if we go to the view here in our VS Code, we turn on word wrap, and then we get all our code neatly within the page, and it also adapts based on how wide our VS Code is. That's very useful to see the code more clearly instead of scrolling sideways. We can also close the Explorer, give us some more space, and easier to see our code. Now what? Well, first let me explain what all of this code means. Doctype is the first thing we see here. That is basically something separate from the rest. Here, doctype basically says that to the browser, which is reading our HTML, it says the following code is going to be HTML. That's basically what that means. And then we can see that within this element and this element, and that's what these are elements. All the things in blue are elements. And I'm going to separate them a bit here for you so you can see more clearly what is going on. As we can see, first we are starting with HTML. HTML element represents, as we can see here, described by the VS Code, represents the root of an HTML document. And an element usually has an opening tag and then a closing tag. And you can see the difference is that the closing tag has this slash before its opening bracket. So we have bracket, and then this is an opening. And then here is a bracket, slash, bracket, and then HTML, which is basically saying what element it is. So opening element of HTML, closing element of HTML. As we can see, the head has the same format, and the body as well. Opening, and then I can put that. Closing. The basics of HTML is that elements live within other elements. So everything that you see on any web page lives within an HTML element. And then these elements, they're children of the HTML element. And for the head, the HTML element is the parent. The same for the body. And as you can see, in the body we have nothing, but in the head we have yet other elements. And this is called nesting. As you can see here, if I delete these lines, HTML is on this line, row in a way, and then head is one step in. And then the meta here is one step in further. And that's how we kind of try to write our HTML so that we see which element is within which. Because here we see meta is within head, and then head is within HTML. And that is the essence of how you combine elements and put elements within other elements. That is essentially what you do using HTML. And there are a lot of different elements. I think it's about 120 or so different HTML elements that we can utilize for different purposes. They all have different kind of inbuilt functionality and attributes to them. Like for example, the title, which we can see anything we write within the title in just plain text is going to show up here in the tab. That's the title's location in a way. So you can only have one title, and that's going to be the text there. And the title has to be in the head. And what is the head element? Well, the head is, in plain words, it's everything that you don't see within the actual browser window. This square is going to be everything that is inside of the body. But the head is kind of the background information. So it's going to have the title here, it's going to have some description that we use for SEO, and it's also going to have, for example, the favorite icon here, the favicon, that we are going to add later on. So it hosts a lot of background info that is useful for the browser and for browser website readers to display the website for other people. Like for example, these meta tags that are basically saying, the first one is saying that the characters we're using are standard characters. This is just a code for just the standard characters that we have available on keyboards and in computers. These are the numericals, the Roman letters, the Latin letters, the the hieroglyphics, all of them are within this UTF-8. Furthermore, the next meta tag, as we can also see, it has an opening tag here, but it's a self-closing tag. We don't have a second meta here like we do in the head. That is what's called a self-closing element. And meta tag is one of them, picture is another one, but most elements are an opening and a closing tag. The next element here basically helps us display our content properly across devices so that it scales properly across mobile and across desktop. Then let's add another meta tag. So if we start writing meta, we see again, and I'm pressing the down key and up, we see that we can choose between the different options here. So we're going to just write the meta, the first one, and we are going to add the slash at the end here. And then inside here, we're going to add name. And this is going to be our description, our website description. That's basically what name is describing here. What is this type of meta tag? Well, it's a description tag. And then what is the content of the description going to be? Well, here we're just going to write whatever we want. This is portfolio website of Jonathan Doe, front-end developer. There we go. So that is going to show up when, for example, people search our website, and then in the Google search you usually get like a little description. That would be that content basically. Then we are going to add actually our favicon here. And then the next thing I want you to do is to go down in the description below this video, and you're going to click the link for the asset folder, because we are going to download here in the GitHub. We're going to go to code, we're going to download the zip. Once we have that downloaded and unzipped, we see that we have our asset. This is our finished project, reference project that is already hosted live. We see that we have an asset folder. And we are just going to drag and drop that into our Explorer here, like so. And then we're going to copy folder. And we can close this. And inside of our assets, we have basically all the icons that we are going to use, including the favicon, including the GitHub logo, and also like the reference picture that I'm using, including also like a standard just empty PDF that you can change with your own PDF. So we can close the asset folder. Then we are going to actually add our favicon. We're going to add a link element here. And instead of relationship is what this attribute stands for, the light blue are attributes to each element. And we use attributes to give them different properties, different functionality basically. So the relationship we are defining here is going to be an icon. We're saying, what is this element here? It's going to be an icon. Where is it located is the href. It's the reference to the location. Where can we find this icon? Well, we're going to say, go into our assets folder. Assets, as we see, is suggested here by VSCode. And then it's suggesting the next here. You're going to go to favicon 32 times 32 PNG. And we're going to save that. And as we can see, the favicon is already updated up here. We are also going to add another attribute called type. And then we're going to say, this is an image of type PNG. This all helps the browser basically make sense of what we're trying to tell it. And then we're going to say, what sizes is this? Well, it's 32x32. And then that is all the info we need for our favicon. We are going to add another version of this favicon though. We see that the link element is also another self-closing tag. Now if we hold, let's target all of this from line 11 to 16. Hold Shift Alt and press down, and then we copy the entire code. Very useful to reuse our code, save us some typing. Now we're just going to change 32, and I'm going to show you another hack. If you target just the 32, and you hit Shift D, and then you hit that 3 times, and you're targeting basically the next instance of 32. So now we have all of these 432s targeted. Now if we hit backspace, we see that all of them are deleted, and we can write 16, hit save, and then we've updated this using the smaller favicon version, as we can see here, because they are used on different devices. Now we are ready to move on to our actual body element here. We are done more or less with our head. We'll get back to a bit later, but for now we can move on to our body and actually create some content that we can see on the page. The first element we're going to create inside of the body element, and everything has to be within an element, by the way, is going to be a section. Sections are very good to divide our website into different parts or sections, and that we're going to use throughout our portfolio. So the section is going to have something inside of it here in the opening tag. It's going to have an attribute called an ID. And an ID is basically a unique identifier. It is basically saying this section is going to be called something. And it's going to be called a hero section, which usually is where you have the picture of the person. As we can see, if I open the reference project here, that's the hero section. If I inspect, right-click and inspect the website, that is going to give us our developer tools. And this might be looking very overwhelming, but as we can see here, it says section. Section with an ID of hero. So I'm hovering over the part that we are currently creating in our projects. And if I click the little arrow here, we see that it has different elements within it. It has a div, P, H1, H2. We're going to get to all of that. But this section with an ID hero is what we are creating here. So back to our project. Inside of our section, we are going to create something called a div, which is basically a catch-all container, has no special meaning at all. It represents its children. It can be used with the class, lang, title attributes. Basically, a div is an element we use to section up HTML content when we don't have anything else like section, body, paragraph element to use that makes sense. So here we're just defining a container. And this container is going to have a class. And that is in a way also giving this container an identifier. Basically only one element can have one ID, but a class can be shared among many different elements. So this class is going to be called a hero container. And you might be asking, why are we adding these at all? Like, what's the point of these? Well, the point is later on when we are creating our CSS, we're going to use them to actually say, hey, make this hero ID red, or make this class hero container blue, as a background. So that's what we're using these for. And then we are going to further nest, put one element into another. Inside of this div, we are going to put an image. And as you can see, I'm not typing the brackets, because it's not really necessary in VS Code. I'm just typing image and it's suggested, and I can hit enter. And I also get some suggested attributes. We are using the source attribute to say, where is this image coming from? Well, it's coming from the asset folder, and it's coming from Ian Dooley, and then these numbers from unsplash.jpg. And you can of course change this to your own picture right now. So I'm going to click that, hit save. As we can see, the picture shows up very, very big, which we will of course fix when we come to the CSS shortly. Then we are going to use the alt attribute here to give this image an alternative text, basically explaining what is this picture for screen readers. So this is a very important part of writing semantic HTML. Basically correct HTML is adding additional info, as we can see here, basically info for those used by people with visual impairments. So this is just going to be a description. This is the profile picture of Jonathan Go. If I right-clicked and inspect on this image, we see that the alt text is here, and we see that it's starting to build up the same structure as we saw here. The next thing we're gonna add under our div is a paragraph that is described with a p element, and that is just basic simple text. Here we're gonna say hello, and I am like so, and if we scroll all the way down under this huge image, we see that the text is showing up here. If I zoom in a bit, it's a bit easier to read. And then under the paragraph, we're gonna have an H1, which is the biggest heading element. And we have 6 of them in HTML, basically starting from 1 to 6, 1 being the largest by default. But we can alter the size styling completely with CSS. But normally you want to have the HTML make sense without needing CSS. That's another way of creating websites that are usable by the most amount of people. Then we want to create an H2 element, a heading that is slightly smaller, front-end developer, like so. As we can see, that's this part here. And then under the H2, we are creating a span element, which is a bit similar to a div. The element doesn't mean anything on its own, but it can be useful when used together with global attributes like class, which we are going to use. We're going to use this to style basically the content within it. And the content within it is going to be our 2 buttons here. So the first one is going to be a button. And this button is going to have the download CV text, as we can see there. And then let's hold Shift Alt and down. And then let's call this contact info and save that. And there we see our 2 buttons. But if we click them now, nothing happens because we haven't given them actually a link. So what we need to do then is we need to wrap this button inside of another element, which is a link element, which is maybe a bit confusingly called an A element. So this is an A element, and let's now copy this or cut, Control X, and paste it within the brackets here, like so. Save that. We're gonna just make that a bit more sense, like so. So within the A here, we have our button. And now everything that we click within the A will send us to a link that is defined here by this path. So now we can basically give the asset folder and then the CV here. And you can change that to the CV name you have and just put it in the Explorer here. Save that and watch now what happens when I click the download CV. It downloads a blank PDF, which is correct because this PDF is blank. And there we go, our download button works. Then let's create another link element and let's put the other button inside of this one, like so. And let's give that, this is gonna basically send us, as we can see in the finished version here, it's going to send us to a different section, our contact section. If I hover here, we see that this is our contact section. How does it do that? Well, notice the URL up top here changed. And that is because we're sending this URL here. And you can, the good thing about using sections is you can basically say, you can specify which part you want to go to in the URL. So here we're going to say hashtag, and we're going to say contact, and we're going to save that. And if we go back to our portfolio, we click this, and of course nothing happens because we don't have a contact section yet. But when we do, we click this, and it's going to take us to it. As we can see, it works because it added this hashtag contact up top here. We can remove that for now and just hit enter. So that is not gonna fool us when we are working until we create the contact section. And with that, we have actually created and finished the HTML of our first hero section here. It might look a bit messy, you can make it a bit more orderly by hitting, if you hover here, you can hit this arrow and basically collapse everything within the section. You can also collapse the image, you can collapse and make it a bit tidier to your preferences. So we can do like this, for example. Now let's actually style this so it looks like our finished project. And we can actually see what's going on because this image is taking all the space. So let's create our first CSS file. We're going to call this style.css, another standard way of naming a CSS file. Nothing in it now, we can close our Explorer. If we switch back to our index.html, we need to actually connect these two files. And the way we do that is by adding the connection in the head. So we are going to add another link here in the head. And that is going to have the relationship of style sheet. And the href is going to be to the style.css file. And now, switching back to our style.css, I am just going to write a comment here by typing Control-K-C, and then I get this comment brackets. Everything I write inside of here is not going to show up in the styling. It's just going to be a comment for our use to just create structure in our code. And here I'm going to say this is going to be the general styling for our website. So the HTML creates the content and the CSS styles it. It makes, bold, it makes the colors different, it gives background colors, it gives shapes. That's what the CSS does, whilst the HTML defines the actual content without the styling. So let's start off by saying HTML, and then we're gonna say scroll behavior smooth. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, we're saying that everything within the HTML tag, and then we use the curly brackets here to give it attributes. The same way we said here, the section has this attribute. That's what we're saying here. The HTML has this attribute. What does that do? Well, as we can see here, if I go to the finished project, and let me just inspect here, the HTML, let me click that, we see that we have the CSS shown here, the property scroll behavior. Let me turn that off by clicking this, and you see it is turned off. And then let me click this contact info button. You see that we instantly jumped to the contact info at the bottom here. If I turn it back on and I scroll up, I hit contact info, you see that we scroll. So that's what we're adding here. We're adding that scroll behavior that is smooth. And we're just doing it at the start so we don't forget it later on. We're just going to write a couple of general CSS behaviors here. And then we're going to style our actual hero section. Next, we want to give our body an actual font family. And here you can choose between a lot of different families. Let's say Franklin Gothic, and hit save. Let's see. And we see that our font changed. Let's also turn on the view and word wrap for our CSS file. But we don't want to use this font, we want to use Poppins. But we don't have Poppins installed by default. So we're going to go to fonts.google.com and we are going to search for Poppins here. And then Poppins shows up. And then we're going to scroll down and we're going to see here different sizes of Poppins. So we're just going to select thin, we're going to select all the ones that are not italic, 200, 300, etc. And 8 and 9. There we go. Then up top here, view selected families, we have this section of code here on the link tab. We're going to copy that. We're going to go back to our index file and we're going to paste that right above our style sheet link. Like so. Hit save. And that's the beauty of prettier extension. Tidies that up for us. So now we've enabled to use this font in our HTML. Now if we go back to our browser, we can go down and scroll here. We see CSS rules, copy paste that, and we can change this font family here with the Poppins font. Save that, and now we see Poppins is enabled. The next thing we're gonna style is our sections, because we're gonna be using a lot of them, and we want to give all of them a couple of different styles. As we can see here, there's a bit of space between them. That is because we have given them a margin. And that is what we see here when we hover. We see that every section has a bit of margin between the other one. You see the hero, what you see here in orange, or brown, light brown, orange, is the margins. So we're gonna give them 40 pixels margins in the top and the bottom, and then we're gonna give them an auto margin, basically aligning things centrally in the left and the right part. So that's what that means. When you put 2, it means this is top and bottom, and the next one is left and right. So back in our project, if I comment this out, watch this space below here. We see that it got removed because this is giving a 40%, a 40 pixel spacing down below here. And then we're gonna give a gap between our different sections that we're gonna have of 30 pixels. That is another way of saying we want some space between our sections. And we're gonna say it's gonna have a max width of 300 pixels. So the gap we can see here is also between the elements we see here, and the max width, as you can see, if I make the website wider, we see that the max width does not exceed 300 pixels. That's what we are setting now. In addition, we're gonna have use some elements for different sections of our page. As we can see, we have a gray box here and a gray box here. This one is gonna be called common container. And we are gonna give this something called a border radius of 10 pixels. And what that means, that's this little curve we see here, because the edges are not sharp. As we can see, that's the same for all the images here. They all have a border radius. Next, we're gonna give is a height of 100%. And what that means is that it's gonna take the height of 100% of its parent element. And then we're gonna justify the content to space evenly. And that is also gonna help us space things apart so they look nice and tidy later, but we're gonna get deeper into using that, using something called Flexbox later on in the portfolio. Then we're gonna target the H4 and the paragraph element, and we're gonna give them a margin of 0 because they by default have a bit too much margin. We don't see that right here. Actually, maybe we do. We do. We see that if we right click on the paragraph here, inspect, and we hover over, we see that it has a bit of a margin on the top and the bottom, and we are removing it right now, which is basically helping us style things the way we want. Then we are gonna target our button class, which is also defined, the dots define the classes. Without the dot, it's just basic elements. And then you also have, which we're gonna use later, hashtag button, for example, that would be a ID of a button. So those are the 3 ways of targeting things within CSS. So the button class that we haven't made yet, but we're gonna use later on, is gonna have a width of 120 pixels, like so. Those are the buttons here we see. Actually, we have buttons already, so we are gonna use those buttons, but we forgot to add our class of buttons. Let's go back to our HTML, inside of our span here, we can see that we have 2 buttons, but we didn't give it a class. So let's do that. Class and then btn. And as we can see, it got a bit wider. Class, btn, and so did this one. Back in our style sheet, we can now give it some padding of 16 pixels, and that is going to give the padding within the button, whilst margins give space outside of the button. Then we're going to give it a background color of RGB, and that stands for red, green, and blue. And we're going to give 55 to the red color, 130 to the green color, and 211 out of the blue color. And that's basically just a color code, and one way to give color to elements. But now it doesn't really look good with the text, so we're going to change the color, which targets the text, to just white. We can also use words. Some are inbuilt in VS Code and in HTML. Then we are going to give it a border of none to remove the black border. We are going to give it a border radius of 12 pixels. We're going to give it a cursor of pointer, so that when we hover over the elements here, we see that it's giving us a nice cursor effect. And then we're going to give it a transition, which is going to be used later on to transition between the different colors we have on our hover. As we can see in the finished project, we have a slightly darker color on hover, and that is not changing instantly, it's transitioning over 300 milliseconds, almost a third of a second. And that is basically what this part does. And then we're going to create our dot btn and then colon hover. So then everything we put in here is going to be active when we hover over. Let's just copy our background color, paste that there. Let's move back to our project, and we're going to change this to 27, 90, and 157. Hit save, and we see we have our hover effect. Great. Let's also, in our HTML, put in our A element here, in the download CV, we want to actually put download as an attribute, because that's going to help the browser figure out that we want to download our CV here, like so. Then we are going to move on to our hero section. Control KC, we're going to write hero in caps, and then we're going to target our hero ID using hashtag, and we're going to take text align, and we're going to say put all the text to the center, as we can see it did. Then we're going to target the hero h2 as well as the hero paragraph. And here you can see that I'm using, in the past I've just been using one element, but now I'm using 2. So hero, let's separate that like this. Here I'm saying take all the h2s that live within the hero ID. And here I'm saying take all the paragraphs that live also within the hero ID. And I'm targeting both of these using a comma. So then all the h2s and all the p's that live within the hero section is gonna have this styling within here. I'm gonna say color, we're gonna give that an RGB, parentheses, 85, 85, and 85, which is going to give us slightly grayer color. And then we're going to say font, weight, 500. There we go. Then we're going to target the hero container that hosts our image. Hero container, we're going to say it's going to have a width of 200 pixels, We're going to say it's going to have a height of 200 pixels. And we are going to say that the border radius is going to be 50%. Like so. And then overflow is going to be hidden. Like so. As we can see, now we got a gray box or gray circle. That is because we said that the hero container is not gonna have anything overflowing of it. So the image sits within the hero container. You see the image is bigger, but because we added this overflow, none of the image that is bigger than this circle is gonna show. And the border radius, if I comment that out, is making it basically a circle. If we put 20 here, it would give it a radius. When you hit 50, it turns it into a circle. So anything above that is still just going to be a circle. And then the width and the height just define the size of the circle. Then we're going to also add a margin here of 40 pixels and auto, which is similar to the one we added to our section here, which is basically going to give it a bit of space in the top and bottom and center it horizontally, like so. Then let's actually get our face in there and not just a random top left section of our page here, or image. So we're going to target the hero image. So remember, that's all the images within the hero ID. We're going to say its height is going to be 100% of its parent element, which we see here is the hero container, which is the one we just set. There we go, that makes it a bit better. And then let's say also that the width is also going to be 100%, and that's going to fill out the sides as well, as we can see. But now we see that the image is skewed. We don't want that. So we're going to say object fit cover, which is basically a way to put it so that you're just going to make the image larger to fit the sides, as it did right now. And there we go. That is our hero section almost done. You see the little line here? We're going to fix that later on. Now we are ready to create our next section. Let's go back to our index file. And we are going to create, after this section, we're going to create another section. We are going to call that ID of about. Inside of this section, we're going to have an H2. It's going to say about, like so. That is our header. Under the header, we're going to have a div with a class of common container. And inside of that common container, we're going to have an H4. That's going to say career. And then under there, we're going to have a paragraph, and that's going to say 2 plus years front end development, like so. Then we are going to target this div, common container, and we're just going to shift alt down to copy it. And here we're going to change that to education. And we're going to change the paragraph to, you know, put your own education here or anything that is relevant to showcase, that you want to showcase. Bachelor's degree, and then master's degree, like so. So that is what we are having here. Then we also need some text under, that is the explanatory text here. We are gonna give that a paragraph element. And one cool thing in VS Code is if you start writing a lorem and you say 30, hit enter, and you get some lorem ipsum text with 30 words, basically. A quick way to fill out some standard text. that is all the actual HTML we need for our about page. Now let's style it. And then it's going to make sense why we are putting all these things within nested divs, because here we see that the gray box here is at the actual div. And then the h4 is this, and then the paragraph is this. So we're using the div here to give this layout as well as background color, and also dividing them like this towards each other. So back in our style sheet, Control K, C, I'm going to write about, and then here we're going to target the about ID as well as the container, as well as the common container, and as well as something called the outer container. And then we are going to display that using flex. Let's switch back to our page. Display flex, hit save, and now we see that things suddenly went, instead of being underneath each other, let me showcase here, about section. Instead of being underneath each other, let me comment out this. Hover over about, you see about, then career, then 2 years. Things are just neatly coming one under the other. When we display it using flex, suddenly things are not neat anymore. Things suddenly popped sideways. We can choose to then make a direction differently. So, and we're going to use that right now. We're going to say about common container, and then also outer container. We're going to say flex direction column, which gives us back our one thing under the other here. But now, in addition to what we had before, we can now add spacing, like we see here, that was added naturally. And we have much more control over how to order things, which is the reason we're using this flex box here. I have a separate video that you can watch here if you want to dig deep into using Flexbox, which this is called. We're not going to go into that here, but we're going to use it to basically make this spacing of the words here and the spacing between the boxes. That is basically how to use Flexbox and why we use Flexbox. Then we're going to give the container a height of 140 pixels, as well as a gap of 20 pixels. Then we're going to give the common container a background color of RGBA, and the last one is going to give our opacity in addition to the red, green, and blue. So for the colors, 234, 234, and then 0.3 in opacity. And that is going to give us this grayish color. If I change that to 1, you see it becomes full gray. 0.3, it becomes more translucent. Then, let's scroll down a bit. I'm going to target the about and then the paragraphs inside. And I'm going to text align, and I'm going to say justify, which aligns this text, as you can see, to the right side here. In addition, I'm going to target the about. I'm going to say common container paragraph, and I'm going to text align that to the center, which is text aligning this. And then I'm going to target the container and then the div, and I'm going to say flex 1. And that is going to give us the equal spacing between our boxes here. And then we are missing actually our container div, which we are going to put outside of the common containers here. So back in our HTML, we're going to create a div, and we're going to give that a class of container, like so, and let's then copy paste our common containers put it inside the container like so. And there we go. It looks a bit more like the finished product. We are still missing to text align these. So let's see what we're missing. Inspect. And we see we have our career here. We have common container. Let's say I believe this is align items to the center. So we are missing this part here. As we can see, ours is also not aligned with the about here. Back in our style sheet, we go to common container, or actually up here to the first one with all these four, we're gonna add align items to the center. And there we go. Then we are done with our about section. Let's move on to our experience section. So after this section, we create another section. You're getting used to this now. An ID of experience, like so. And inside of here, we have an H2. We are actually gonna have very similar things. So let's copy this entire part, the H2, the container, and the common container. Let's copy that down and paste it within the experience section, like so. We are also missing a div here, like so. Closing div, like so. You see Prettier is giving us a warning, like so. Opening div, closing div. So div, div, two divs nested. Obviously, we're not gonna have the same text here, so we're gonna change that to experience. But we see that we are reusing the container and the common container. That's the beauty of CSS and classes, because we can reuse the styling we wrote without having to repeat ourselves. In the first one, we're gonna say front end, and then the paragraphs are gonna be our skills, so HTML. And then let's shift alt down 3 times. We're going to say CSS, JavaScript, and Sass. And then let's just copy the entire common container once down, save, and we see we get another box here. We can say backend, Node.js, Express.js, Git, and PostgreSQL, like so. And having reused all the code, that is actually everything we need for the about HTML. Moving on to our style sheet, Control-K-C, write experience, and inside of here, we're going to target the experience ID. We're going to say display this using flexbox, same as in the past. Where we're going to align the items to the center. And we're also going to give it a flex direction of column to make it a column and not a row. Then we can copy paste this whole thing down, Shift Alt down. And we're going to add, after the experience, container. Here we're targeting the container within the experience ID. We're going to say height of 300 pixels, stretching them, and also width of 100% of its parent, which is the whole width here. And then we can move on to our projects section here. Back in our HTML, let's add another section. Let's give it an ID of projects. And don't you know, we can reuse our HTML again. So let's copy the whole container and everything inside of it. Put it in there. And now we have a copy. Then we can change the H4 to Pokedex. That's going to be our first project. We can remove the paragraphs. We can add an image instead. And for the source, we are gonna go into the assets folder. We are gonna choose the Pokedex. And we're gonna say project 1 for the alt text. You can give that a capital P, project 1. We are also gonna give it a class of project-1 that we are gonna target in our CSS to give it obviously a little smaller size. Now we can delete the second comment container because we're going to reuse this one we made. After the image, we are going to create a span. Inside of the span, we are going to create a link element, an A element, that is going to lead to https://github.com and then slash and then whatever link is to your repository for the project that you have made. Then we're going to say open this target, open this in a new window by using target blank. And then inside of here, we're going to say it's going to be a button with the class of button btn, and it's going to say GitHub. And they are being displayed here, but we can't see them yet. Then let's copy this whole A element down. And here you could link people to the live version of your project like we have here, if you decide to put that live. Or you can just delete this button if you don't intend to. So I'm going to leave that link the same, but here you obviously change it to what fits for your projects. And then we are also going to change this comment container class to project container, like so. Then we are ready to move on to our style sheet. Let's comment, Control K, C, projects. Then we're going to target our projects ID. We're going to say display them using flexbox. We're going to align items to the center. We are going to give it a flex direction of column. And then we are going to copy paste this. We are going to say projects and then the containers within them, container. We are going to say flex direction column. We are going to say height auto to fit all the projects we put in, no matter how many we do. Then we're going to say text align to the center, to text line the Pokedex here. Then I'm going to target all the projects we have. So project 1, project 2, project 3, and project 4. And I'm going to give them a border radius of 12 pixels. And I'm going to give them a width of 100% of the parent, which is decreasing the size of the image to 100%. Then the next thing I'm going to target is the text. So hashtag projects and then the H4, that is the Pokedex text. I'm going to give it a bit of padding, so 30 pixels in the top, 0 on the left and right, and then 20 pixels at the bottom. And that is another way, when you have 3, that means top, left, right, and then bottom. If you add another one here, it would be the same. Then it would be top, left, bottom, right. And we're going to give it a color of RGB. And then we can choose the ones we've already used. It's going to be 85, 85, 85. A bit more grayed out color. Then we're going to target the span here, which is hosting our buttons both here and in the projects. We're going to display using flex we're going to justify the content to the center, and then we're going to give them a gap to get some spacing between them of 20 pixels. And then we're also going to give them a margin at the top of 20 pixels to get a bit of spacing between the text here and the buttons and the images, and also here. Great, let's add our other projects in our HTML. So let's just copy the entire project container here. We can Shift Alt down 3 times, like so. Now we see we have 4 identical copies. Let's change all of them. Let's see. This is the first one. That's okay. We can close that. That's done. The next one is going to be called Quiz, like so. It's going to be project 2, and we can here go and say quiz project. These can be left the same. Next one is going to be tic-tac-toe, project 3. That's going to be tic-tac-toe project. And then the last one is going to be, that's going to be to-do, for and to-do project. There we go. Now we have all our projects. They open links to our repo. Now they're just going straight to GitHub because we need to also add it after the slash, the actual rest of the URL. Then we are ready to add our contact section. So after this, we add another section. Here we're going to add an h2, contact. Then after that, we're going to add a div with the class of container. And then inside of here, we're going to add an A. We're going to say, first one is going to go to mail to. And then this is where you put your email at example.com. And that is going to send an email to this address. Then inside of this A element, we're going to add a button. And inside, actually that button is going to have a class of btn. Inside of the button, we're going to have an image with a source of assets. And we're going to choose the email light PNG. And that's going to have an alt of email. And then we can just copy this whole A element down twice. And the second one is going to take us to https www.linkedin.com/ and then obviously your name, your username. And then this one we're going to change to LinkedIn Lite. Next one is going to be GitHub, and that's going to be our GitHub account. Let's just copy this part here, paste it in there, and that's going to be, instead of LinkedIn, that's going to be github.com, your name. And then we are also going to add in our href here for the GitHub and the LinkedIn, we're going to say target blank to open them in a new page, a new tab, like so. Then after this section, we're going to add our last HTML. That is going to be our footer, which has its own element. We're going to add a paragraph here. Inside of the paragraph, we're going to write and copy and then semicolon, like so. And that is going to give us the sign of the copyright. We're gonna write Jonathan Doe 2023, all rights reserved, like so. Cool. That is the last of our HTML. Now let's go to our style sheet. We are gonna Control K C contact. We're gonna target the contact ID. We're gonna say display, not inline, but flex. We're gonna align items to the center. We're gonna give it a flex direction of column. Did we not give it a class? We didn't give the section in our HTML an ID. That's why nothing is happening. So let's give it a contact ID. That looks better. Back in our CSS, let's target our contact and then container. And then we're gonna give it a height of auto, like so. And then hashtag contact. And then button. We're gonna give that a height of 50 pixels. A width of 50 pixels. A background of none. Not background color, background, like so. If you want to use none, you have to say background. And padding of 0. So now the images are actually overflowing the buttons. The buttons are the correct size, but the images are not. So we're going to contact and then choose the images inside. And we're going to say that the height of the images are going to be 100% of the parent, which is the button we just styled, like so. And then last part, Control K C footer. And inside of here, we're going to target the footer. And we're going to say text align center. We are going to say color RGB. And then we're going to choose the 85, like so. And we're going to say margin is going to be 100 pixels. And then auto to give us a bit of space here when we scroll to the bottom. Awesome. That looks like we have finished our project. And I would say that that looks quite similar to our project here. Cool. Then we are done. Let's put our website online for the world to see. So you're going to go to Netlify. You're going to create an account and then log in. Once you are logged in, you're going to click this Add New Site, and you're going to click Deploy Manually. And then literally everything you have to do is just drag the folder that you created this website and drop it in there. And then Netlify is going to do all the magic on its own. So you're going to just wait a couple of seconds, usually up to like a minute or two. And then normally we should have our site hosted live. As we can see here, it got its own URL. We click that and we see that we have our site live. How cool is that? That is the website we were just creating, and now it is hosted on the internet with its own URL link. If you want an easier link, you can go here to domain settings. You can choose options here and edit site name, and then you can write whatever you want, HTML, CSS, portfolio for beginners. Let's see if that's available. It is. There we go. And now if I refresh or go to the site overview and I click here, we get our new link. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was a good learning opportunity for you. And if you like this video, I have many similar on this channel and one video suggested for you here, including all of the projects that you saw in this portfolio. So if you want to get started on building some projects of your own, I highly suggest any of these videos. Until next time, see ya.